Hey everybody, welcome to Module 5. Now this week we're going to be looking at something a little different, and you're not going to find much of the information in your textbook. And that's why it's really important this week that you make sure you read the resources, the reading resources that accompany Module 5 this week. And the focus is going to be on calendaring and docketing cases and determining some of the processes and techniques that are used by courts to make sure that cases are processed in an efficient and effective manner. So again, it's really important that you use and read the reading resources this week. I will go over some of the key concepts that I think are important for the week, but you still need to be very diligent and make sure that you read that information, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and disappear so that we can begin talking about this week's assignment. Okay, so I'm gone. So again, it's very important that you take a look at the information here to get started for your module. And so when I open this up, you're going to see a couple different articles. One is on the federal court system in the United States, and specifically it's 10 pages that you need to pay attention to, pages 37 to 47. This is an article on improving case flow management, a brief guide. So I want you to take a look at that. That'll help you with this week's writing assignment. And then finally, the model continuance policy. And then the docket management program. All right, so these are going to be important resources that you'll need this week in order to work on this particular milestone. Now, students in the past seem to have had some difficulty with this particular milestone. It is not intended to be difficult, but it is important that you tie some of the processes and techniques from these readings into your responses for this week's assignment. Okay, so again, take a look at these, spend some time, read these, become familiar, make a note on the different types of techniques and processes that are used today as a means to facilitate a more efficient and effective processing of cases throughout the court system, because it is really essential for the courts to process a case in a very timely manner. Otherwise, you end up with cases sitting in the system for way too long. Memories become vague. A lot of the legal issues have to be taken care of within certain periods of time. So, you know, we have some constitutional issues at the state and at the federal level. So we need to make sure that cases are processed very timely. All right. So again, take a look and read this. Right now, I'm going to go to the grading rubric. So I'm going to disappear for a second and I'll be right back. Hold on. Okay, we are back. So this week in our scenario, we're going to be looking at a couple of issues. One of those is calendaring and docketing of cases. And so the first thing you have to look at is analyze how federal, state, and local courts calendar and docket cases. Are these processes effective in promoting efficiency and defend your response? And the way you defend your response is by looking at some of the resources that we have. So you can reference one or more of those as a means to defend your response as you prepare your response for this week. So, you know, just a couple things. Realistically, most federal, state, and local courts probably docket and calendar cases in very similar ways. Some are more obviously more up-to-date in terms of technology, such as the federal government. Large urban court systems are probably very familiar with technology. Some rural and small courts may not be as technologically savvy as some of the larger urban courts, but nonetheless, most federal, state, and local courts docket and calendar cases in a very similar way. Now, the purpose of the docket calendar is to effectively schedule the courts and manage time, and that's going to be critical. Federal, state, and local courts will try to realistically schedule cases by recognizing factors that may lead to the case quickly settling or having to be continued. Courts also try to maintain firm trial dates and calendars by having continuance policies and setting factors. So in other words, not allowing cases to be continued on and on again. And that sometimes can be very problematic, especially for your witnesses and other people who have to appear in court. So, setting firm dates and abiding by the court's continuation policies becomes very important. All right, so make sure you take a look at the continuance policy that's offered this week. Now, another means that courts use to become efficient and effective in terms of processing paperwork is electronic filing. Electronic filing helps federal, state, and local courts to effectively both calendar and docket cases. Federal and state courts use electronic systems, and most local courts use similar systems or their own independent electronic filing system. And these e-file systems, or the electronic filing systems, can monitor movement, assignments, and noticing of cases within the court. So in other words, it's the ability to have this information right at one's fingertips. So you're able to see what's going on in terms of if a case has to be reassigned, or if there's something that comes up in the case where in fact maybe there is a legitimate reason why it needs to be continued. So people involved can learn how to manage that information correctly and efficiently, so we use our courts to the best possible means. There's nothing worse than having a judge in a court and the court's dark, meaning that the court's not doing anything. That doesn't mean that the judge isn't busy, but typically if the courtroom is dark, then it's being underutilized because you don't have enough cases assigned to it. If you have too many cases assigned to a court, it's being overutilized. In the same way, it's not going to be very, very efficient. All right, so electronic monitoring or e-filing, any type of system, and the resources talk about a couple case management flow or case flow management programs, docket management programs, things like that. They're all designed to move cases in an efficient and effective manner throughout the court system so that everything is done on time. Now, we talk about docketing, and docketing is defined in my announcement for this week, so take a look at that. But to effectively docket cases, the courts will provide a docket number to each filed action and maintain a docket sheet. So in other words, each case has a docket number. So it could be ABC 5678, State of Washington versus Jim Doyle. All right, that's a docket number. That's a docket. Okay, I have a number, and that number files my case throughout the history of my case. And the docket is basically sort of a historical outline of what's been happening in my case from the time I got, arraigned and filed and preliminary hearing. All that stuff is captured in the docket programs. So make sure you read the information about managing dockets. By maintaining an effective docket program, it makes it easier for cases to be found. Okay, so we're looking for these cases. Judge need that information. It's an easy way for those to be found. The management of calendars and dockets through technology makes it faster, more reliable, and more efficient to operate an efficient case management program that yields judicial efficiency. All right, and appropriate court staff can easily find files and schedules, and records can be located when and where they need to be. So this ensures that cases are going to get processed very timely, and we find the information that the court needs to move things along. Okay, so it's important again that you take a look at these resources and understand what they refer to. All right, because the book doesn't talk about this a lot, but the programs that are outlined in the handouts will become very essential. All right, because they're going to talk about dockets, docket management programs, case flow management programs, model continuance policy, e-filing, continuance policies. All these things are going to be critical for this assignment. All right. So basically, again, all three courts probably use a very similar process. Your responsibility here is to outline some of those processes or techniques, and I've given you some of those. So those are some of the ways that courts at both the state, federal, and local level maintain calendar and docketing of cases. All right. So again, pay attention to those, read that material, and then reference those resources as you complete that part of the assignment. Now, when it comes here to the next one about describe how calendaring and continuance of the scenario would be handled differently in state systems versus federal systems, I think what's key to remember here in part is the level of cases that each type of court handles. So we've learned that the federal system doesn't handle nearly as many cases, for example, as state courts do. And so we can tie some of that into this whole idea of continuing a case and its impact on the calendars. Now, as a general rule, in terms of calendaring, especially if we're talking about our particular scenario, which we are, in federal court, the same judge will often hear the case or follow the case from beginning to end. This means that a judge may have more dedication, commitment, and knowledge to the case in the federal court than in the state court. Calendaring in the federal court system also has the advantage of what's known as the Speedy Trial Act of 1974, and that is referenced in our textbook, so take a look at that. The Speedy Trial Act established timelines for federal criminal prosecution, such as filing within 30 days of an arrest or summons, beginning trial within 70 days after indictment or initial appearance. In the federal court, courtroom deputy clerks, for example, will schedule and monitor cases on the calendars, and attorneys will be reminded of approaching deadlines by court staff. Now, the difference is if this case was handled in state courts, several different judges might handle this case before it is completely resolved. Because you should recall, under the state court structure, in some states, courts of limited jurisdiction might hear preliminary hearings. In other words, they determine whether or not there's sufficient evidence to hold somebody over for a felony trial. And then it moves up to the next higher court. So that's going to be handled by one judge. And then, of course, the trial judge is going to handle the case. Now, the key thing here, though, is that, state courts, because of their workload and variations in cases and the availability of judges, things might need to be continued or delayed. So sometimes I think my experience is in state court is that cases tend to be continued a little bit more frequently. All right, so I testified as a witness in both federal and state courts, and I can tell you at our local court, for both misdemeanor and felony cases, I have often had to go to get a subpoena as a police officer. I show up for court, I sit outside and I wait for an hour or two, only to be told that the case has been continued, or the defendant's sick, for whatever reason, I'm not going to testify. Sometimes it's because they might have reached a disposition, but generally not very likely, chiefly because of some other reason that the case has been continued. Maybe the defendant's lawyer is unavailable because he's in a trial in another courtroom, or maybe it's because the prosecutor isn't available or isn't ready for the case because he or she just got the case that morning. All right, so my experience has been that state courts tend to be very busy, and it's easier to get a continuance in state court versus perhaps in federal court. Because like I said, in federal court, you tend to have one judge seeing a case from the very beginning to the very end, all right? And so that's going to be important, I think, in terms of the ability of the court to process things in a very efficient and effective manner. If you've ever been to a state court and you've been to federal court, they, to me, are like night and day. If you walk into a state court system, it's very busy. A lot of people's in the hallway, a lot of talking going on. The courtrooms are busy, unless they're in trial or having some level of hearing. Lawyers are talking to lawyers. Things are trying to get resolved at that level. Whereas in federal court, the times I've been there, if you've ever been to federal court, very solemn. You walk down the hall, there's hardly anybody. Courtrooms are very quiet. So things might be handled in a more effective and efficient manner at the federal court level than at the state court level. So calendaring is going to be depending on a lot of things. Availability of courts, for example, the processes that a case has to take, and the number of judges that are going to hear those steps in the legal process, and things like that. Okay, I'm going to cut you off here, and I'm going to come back for part 2 in just a minute. All right, thanks a lot. Bye.